Elon Musk never expected to find himself in this position. He had just wrapped up a meeting at one of his companies, his mind preoccupied with the next big breakthrough in space exploration, when his car slowed at a traffic light in downtown Los Angeles. The city was bustling, as always, people rushing to meetings, commuters on their way to work, the hum of the city blending into a constant buzz of noise. Yet, something caught his attention. Something that felt out of place. There, on a worn bench by the sidewalk, sat an older man. His clothes were tattered, the edges of his jacket frayed from years of use. He wore a faded baseball cap, his face covered in the kind of rugged stubble that told the story of many difficult days. A small cardboard sign lay next to him, written in hastily scrawled letters, "Former soldier, need help." Musk's eyes lingered on the man. He wasn't sure why, but there was something about him, a quiet desperation in his eyes, that struck Musk in a way nothing else had in a long time. This wasn't just another homeless person in a city full of them. No, this man's eyes told a story. It was the kind of story Musk had seen before, but never from someone in such plain sight. The light turned green, and the car started moving, but Musk's mind didn't follow. Instead, he found himself asking his driver to pull over. "Stop here," he said, his voice unexpectedly firm. The driver glanced at him, confused but obedient, and slowed the car to a halt just beside the park bench. Without saying another word, Musk got out of the car, his tall figure walking toward the bench. The air was cool, and the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. It felt like any other late afternoon in the city, but Musk felt a sense of urgency he couldn't explain. The man looked up, startled at first. His eyes scanned Musk's designer jacket and polished shoes, obviously a man who didn't belong in this part of town. He hesitated, not sure how to react. But Musk just smiled, soft and approachable. "Hi," he said. "What's your name?" The man looked away, unsure if he should even respond. He had become used to people pretending not to see him, moving on as if he were invisible. But something in Musk's voice, something in the way he didn't just keep walking, made him pause. "I'm John," the man muttered. His voice was hoarse, like it had been a while since he'd spoken to anyone outside of the street corner. Musk took a seat beside him, not in a hurry, not as if he had a meeting waiting. "John," he said, nodding thoughtfully. "I'm Elon." John nodded back, still unsure where this conversation would lead. "Not much to talk about," he replied with a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "I've been out here for years." Elon watched him, his thoughts racing. How did a person end up here? Musk had spent years building companies that reached the stars, designed cars that would change the future of transportation, and revolutionized entire industries. Yet, here was a man who had fought for his country and was now sitting on the curb, invisible to the world. "Tell me your story, John," Musk said, his voice gentle yet insistent. "How did you end up here?" John shifted uncomfortably. He didn't know where to begin, but something about Musk's presence made him feel safe in a way he hadn't in years. Maybe it was the quiet curiosity in Elon's eyes, or maybe it was the fact that Musk didn't seem to look at him with pity, but with something else, understanding, perhaps, or even respect. "I was in the army," John began, his voice faltering at first. He cleared his throat and continued. "I served my country. Saw things that no one should ever have to see. After I came back, well, the world wasn't waiting for me. People don't realize how it messes with you, being out there, seeing things, doing things." Musk nodded, listening intently. He had read the statistics, heard the stories about veterans returning home and facing the horrors of PTSD, but hearing it from John, in such raw and unfiltered terms, made it hit home in a way he hadn't anticipated. John paused, his hands trembling as he adjusted the sign on his lap. "I tried. I really did. Tried to get help, tried to get a job, tried to reconnect with my family. But, it's not that easy, you know. It's like no one wants to talk to you anymore. You're just a problem. They don't want to help you, they want to forget you. Musk felt a knot form in his stomach. He had heard about the struggles veterans faced, but hearing it from someone so directly in front of him, someone who had worn the uniform and returned home to nothing, was different. This wasn't just another statistic. This was a man, a life, hanging by a thread. "I'm sorry," Musk said softly, his voice thick with empathy. "It's not right. You deserve better." John shrugged, the bitterness in his voice sharp. "Yeah, well, the world doesn't care about people like me. I'm just one of many." Musk remained silent for a moment, his mind racing. He had never expected his day to unfold like this, but here he was, sitting on a bench next to a man who had served his country, a man who had been discarded by society. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had to do something. The sound of people bustling by, oblivious to the conversation unfolding just a few feet away, reminded Musk of how often people failed to notice what was right in front of them. But what if he could do something? What if he could make a difference in just one person's life? "John," Musk said, finally breaking the silence. "I want to help. I can't promise I can change everything, but I can promise I'll try. I'll make sure people notice. You won't be invisible." John blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in Musk's voice. "Why would you want to help me?" he asked, genuinely curious. Musk leaned forward, his eyes locking with John's. "Because, John, you're not just another homeless vet. You're someone who has given everything. And that deserves respect." There was a long pause. For a moment, neither of them said anything, just sitting in the late afternoon sun. Then, John's face softened, the hardness of years spent on the streets giving way to something else, hope, perhaps, or the glimmer of a future he had nearly given up on. "You mean it?" John asked, his voice quieter now. Musk nodded. "I do. I'm not leaving until we figure this out." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the sun sank lower, casting an orange glow over the city, Elon Musk sat beside John, neither of them moving. The world around them continued to rush by, oblivious to their quiet exchange. People walked past, engrossed in their own lives, their phones glued to their hands. It was as if the moment happening just a few feet away wasn't worth a second glance. But that was exactly what Elon wanted to change. John's eyes were still wide with disbelief. He had been down this road before, people promising help, offering empty words that never materialized. Trust had become a foreign concept for him. In the years since his return from overseas, he had seen so many veterans and homeless individuals left behind. Each had their story, but none of them had been saved. So why would Elon Musk, one of the wealthiest men in the world, care? Musk understood the skepticism. He had seen it in others, too. He had always been the one to think big, the one who pushed for what seemed impossible, whether it was sending a car to Mars or revolutionizing energy consumption. But this was different. This wasn't a business venture or a new technological leap. This was about people. Real lives. And he felt, for the first time in a long while, that he could actually make a difference. John looked at Musk for a long moment, unsure of what to make of him. There was something about the way Musk carried himself, his calm, composed demeanor, and the way his eyes didn't just glance over him like so many others did. It wasn't pity that Musk offered, it was genuine concern, something John hadn't encountered in years. "You really want to help me?" John finally asked again, his voice quieter now, almost tentative. Elon nodded, his face softening. "Yeah, I do. You've given so much for this country. You deserve more than to be forgotten." John turned his gaze to the bustling street, lost in thought. A memory from his past surfaced, a memory of his younger self, strong and determined, fresh out of boot camp. He had been full of hope then, eager to serve, to protect. Back then, it had all seemed so simple. But now he felt like a ghost, drifting from one day to the next, struggling to find a way back to a life that seemed so far out of reach. He didn't want to admit it, but a part of him was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, Musk meant what he said. That there was still hope for him, for people like him. He had almost forgotten what hope felt like. Elon broke the silence. You mentioned your family earlier. Are they still around? John looked away, his jaw tightening. The mention of his family hit a raw nerve. I tried to reach out to them, he said quietly. But it's been years. I don't think they want anything to do with me anymore. Elon nodded, his expression one of understanding. I get it, he said softly. But you know, sometimes the hardest thing isn't asking for help. It's letting people in when they've given up on you. John's eyes flickered with something, a mixture of pain and regret, but he didn't respond. Instead, he stared down at his worn boots, the leather cracked and faded from years of use. Musk, sensing the shift in mood, decided to change the subject. He couldn't fix everything in one conversation, but maybe, just maybe, he could offer John a small step toward the future. You know, Musk said casually, his tone light but intentional, I think we could start by getting you off this bench. I know a few people who could help, people who've dealt with veterans, people who know how to get you back on your feet. I can introduce you, get you into a program that helps with housing, healthcare, maybe even a job, if that's something you want. John hesitated. The thought of re-entering the world, of having a fresh start, felt both terrifying and exhilarating. He had spent so long in survival mode that the idea of rebuilding his life seemed like a distant dream. But there was something in Musk's words, an urgency, a promise of action, that stirred something inside him. I don't know, John muttered. What if I don't fit in? What if I fail again? Musk leaned forward, his voice more earnest now. John, you've already done the hardest part. You've survived. The rest, it's just about finding the right path. And you don't have to do it alone. John's eyes flickered with doubt. He had tried to rebuild before, to find his place in a world that had moved on without him. But every attempt had failed, and every failure had chipped away at whatever small glimmer of hope he had left. I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Elon thought for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. You don't have to trust anyone right away. But I want to show you that people care. That I care. Let's get you to a place where you can start again. Let's take this one step at a time. John's gaze shifted to the phone Elon was holding, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the faintest spark of hope. Maybe this time, it wouldn't be just empty promises. Maybe this time, there would be a chance. All right, John said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll give it a shot. Musk smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. That's all anyone can ask for. As Elon began typing on his phone, setting up a meeting with a local veterans organization, a curious crowd had begun to form around them, phones raised. The quiet exchange between Musk and John was quickly becoming an internet sensation. Would this seemingly random encounter spark something bigger? Only time would tell. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for both Elon and John. What had started as an unexpected meeting on a downtown street corner had quickly escalated into a story that captivated the world. News outlets, social media platforms, and even celebrities began to take notice of the encounter between the billionaire entrepreneur and the homeless veteran. People were sharing videos of Elon sitting with John on that bench, offering help and hope, and the overwhelming response was nothing short of incredible. But amid the outpouring of support, there were also unexpected consequences. The attention had brought with it a new set of challenges that neither Musk nor John had anticipated. Elon sat at his desk in his office, his gaze fixed on the phone in his hand as he scrolled through the endless notifications. Messages from business partners, journalists, and even strangers flooded in. Some were congratulating him for doing something good, others were questioning his motives. The social media backlash was also growing. There were people who wondered whether Elon was simply using John's plight as a publicity stunt to improve his image. The comments ranged from supportive to harsh, accusing Musk of trying to turn the veteran's suffering into a feel-good moment for his own benefit. "Damn it," Musk muttered under his breath. "This is supposed to be about helping him, not about me." He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The pressure was mounting. Elon wasn't used to having his every move scrutinized in this way. It wasn't about business or technology this time, it was about something far more personal. It was about a man who had been forgotten by society, a man who had given everything in service to his country and now had nothing but the clothes on his back and a cardboard sign. But the world wasn't interested in the deeper story. They didn't want to know what had led John to this point, they just wanted a headline, a soundbite. As Musk continued to process the barrage of messages, his assistant knocked on the door, stepping into the room with a stack of papers in hand. "Elon, there's a call online too. It's from a reporter at the LA Times. They want a statement about your helping hand moment with John." Musk sighed, pushing the phone aside. "Set it up," he said flatly. He wasn't sure what he could say that would make any difference. The media was already painting a picture, one he hadn't intended to create. And yet, deep down, Musk knew that this was exactly why people like John were so often overlooked, because no one cared enough to dig deeper, to truly understand their struggles. As he prepared for the call, Elon's thoughts returned to John. He had kept in touch with him over the past few days, ensuring that the veteran had a place to stay, that he had access to the resources he needed. A local veterans charity had agreed to meet with John to discuss housing options, and there was even talk of getting him a job interview at a local organization that offered support to veterans in need. But despite the help that was starting to flow in, Elon could sense that something wasn't right. He'd seen the change in John's demeanor over the past few days. At first, there had been a flicker of hope, a sense of cautious optimism. But as the world watched, John had started to retreat. It was as if the attention, the expectations, were too much for him to handle. Meanwhile, John sat in the small, modest apartment that Elon had arranged for him. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over his head, something he hadn't had in years. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the cold sting of the streets. But something was gnawing at him. Every time he turned on the news or opened his phone, there it was, his face, his story, plastered everywhere. He couldn't escape it. It was like the world was watching him, waiting for him to succeed or fail. And that pressure, it was suffocating. John had always prided himself on being self-reliant. He had never wanted charity, never wanted to be anyone's project. He wasn't sure how to handle this new reality, where people saw him not as a man, but as a symbol. A symbol of what? Was he now just another feel-good story for the media to latch onto? He could hear the faint hum of his phone vibrating from the other room, another notification lighting up the screen. Hesitant, he reached for it, the words on the screen glaring back at him, Elon Musk's new charity project, will it save the veteran? John felt a lump form in his throat. It was hard enough trying to adjust to a life he never thought he'd have to live. But now, the world was treating him like a piece of a larger puzzle, something to be fixed, something to be measured against the expectations of others. Elon was still on the phone when he heard a soft knock at his office door. His assistant poked her head inside. "Elon, it's John. He's here." Musk immediately felt a tightness in his chest. He had hoped to meet with John privately, away from the media circus, but the rising tension had made that impossible. He put down the phone and stood, moving quickly to greet John. John entered the office, looking more guarded than he had in the past. His eyes, which had once sparkled with a new sense of possibility, were now filled with doubt and uncertainty. He had always been a man of few words, but now he seemed even quieter, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. "Elon, John said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to talk. Musk gestured for him to sit. Of course, John. What's on your mind? I don't know if I can do this, John admitted, his voice cracking. I don't know if I can live up to all this. The media, the people, it feels like they're waiting for me to fail. Elon felt a pang of sympathy. He could see it now, the immense pressure John was under, the weight of the expectations that had been placed on him, when all he had wanted was to rebuild his life. Musk sat across from him, his tone calm and measured. You don't have to be anyone else, John, he said quietly. This is about you, not about what the world expects. Take your time. We'll do this together, at your pace. But if you want to back out, if you're not ready, just say the word. No one's going to force you. John looked up, meeting Musk's gaze. For the first time since they had met, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time, compassion. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough to keep him going. The following week brought even more uncertainty for both John and Elon. The media frenzy had only intensified, and with it, the pressure. What had been a small, seemingly sincere act of kindness had now escalated into something larger than either of them could have predicted. There were interviews, reporters, even people on the street speculating about the future of the billionaire and the veteran story. But behind the headlines, John was quietly unraveling. Elon had noticed the subtle shifts in John's behavior, the hesitance, the distance. For every attempt Musk made to keep things moving forward, it seemed John pulled further back. The veteran, once so willing to embrace this new chance at life, now found himself tangled in his own feelings of inadequacy. It wasn't just the overwhelming media attention. It was the way he felt like a spectacle, not a person, how his identity was slipping away in favor of the narrative that everyone else seemed to create around him. And then, there was the call from his old military unit. They wanted him back, well, sort of. You need to come back to us, John. We're a family, and we need to make sure you're getting the help you need, one of his old commanders had said. There was a part of John that wanted to believe that this offer could mean something good, perhaps a fresh start with people who knew him, who understood the man he used to be. But there was also a heavy weight on his shoulders. How could he go back to that life? He had tried so hard to leave it behind. John paced in his small apartment, the walls now feeling smaller than ever. His phone buzzed again, more notifications, messages from the people Elon had introduced him to. Housing, job opportunities, therapy, legal advice, it was all there. Yet it all felt like too much. Too soon. Too fast. He stared at the screen, but his mind drifted to darker thoughts. Could he actually handle all of this? The expectations, the changes, the life-altering decisions. Was he ready to face a world that had left him behind for so long? Meanwhile, Elon was facing his own set of challenges. The phone call had just ended. The media pressure was at a boiling point, but now there was something else brewing, a deeper, more serious issue. Several prominent political figures had begun to voice concerns about his involvement with John. Some saw Elon's actions as an opportunity to push forward their own agendas regarding homelessness and veterans' rights, but others were more skeptical. Was this a genuine act of kindness, or a stunt designed to further Musk's public image? One senator had already made a public statement: while we appreciate Mr. Musk's generous intentions, we question his involvement in issues that require more nuanced, systemic solutions. This is not a problem that can be solved in a viral moment. We need policy change, not charity. Elon couldn't help but feel his frustration rising. For years, he had taken risks, challenged the status quo, and fought for what he believed in, whether it was with SpaceX or Tesla. But this? This felt like a fight he wasn't prepared for, one where the stakes weren't about technology or business, but about his integrity, about his very identity. He stood up and walked to the window of his office, looking out over the bustling city. It was a beautiful view, but for the first time, it felt empty. He wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that he was being scrutinized for helping someone in need, or that John was now doubting whether he deserved help at all. That afternoon, Elon decided to pay John a visit, hoping to speak with him in person. As he arrived at the apartment, he hesitated for a moment before knocking. His hand hovered above the door, but he could hear movement inside, the shuffle of footsteps. It wasn't just John, there was someone else in the room. John opened the door, his face a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "Elon. I didn't expect you." "I know," Musk said with a small, tight smile. "Can we talk?" John stepped aside, allowing Elon to enter. The apartment still felt cold and bare, but there was something different in the air today. There was tension. There was unease. "I've been thinking," John began, his voice shaky. "About everything. About the media, about this project. He stopped, unable to find the right words. Elon sat down, his expression soft. "I know it's a lot, John. And I know it wasn't supposed to go like this. But I want you to know that I'm here for you. Whatever you need, we can do this together." John looked away, running his hands through his hair. "I'm not sure I can do it. I can't keep living in the spotlight. It's not who I am." Elon could see the pain in John's eyes, the same fear he had seen in so many of his employees and colleagues when they were confronted with change, with challenges they didn't feel prepared to face. It wasn't the fame that was hurting John. It was the pressure. The fear of failing. The idea that everything he had once known was slipping away, and that he couldn't hold on. "I didn't want any of this," John continued, his voice cracking. "I just want to be left alone. To get back to normal. But now it's like everyone is watching me. And I don't know if I can keep pretending I'm okay." Elon felt a surge of empathy. He wasn't just a businessman or a billionaire in this moment, he was a man who had once faced his own doubts, his own struggles. He had been the underdog, the one who dared to think differently and push against the current. "You're not pretending, John," Elon said softly. "And you don't have to be okay all the time. It's okay to struggle. But you don't have to do it alone. You've got options. You've got people who care. You've got me. But I won't push you into something you're not ready for." For a long moment, John remained silent, his eyes cast downward. The room was heavy with uncertainty, but there was a small, tentative hope lingering in the air. As the conversation continued, John's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. A new opportunity had surfaced, a chance for John to get back into the workforce, to help other veterans, to make a difference in a way that didn't feel like a charity case. But it was also a huge risk. Would John take the leap, or would he retreat back into his shell, unwilling to trust the world again? The decision would change everything, for him and for Elon. The clock was ticking, and the next choice would set them both on an entirely new path. The tension in the air was palpable. John stared at his phone, the message still glowing on the screen. It was an offer, a chance for him to work with a non-profit that helped other veterans transition back into civilian life. It seemed like the perfect opportunity, a way to regain some sense of purpose, to stop feeling like a mere spectator in his own life. But as his finger hovered over the "accept" button, doubt crept in again. Could he really take this step? Could he trust that this was the right path, or was it just another setup for failure? Elon watched him carefully, sensing the weight of the decision pressing down on John's shoulders. It was clear that John had made significant progress in the past few weeks, but the scars of his past, the trauma and pain, weren't something that could be easily erased. There was more to this than just an opportunity, there was the fear of repeating past mistakes, of being let down again. John glanced up at Elon, his eyes searching for some kind of reassurance. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he confessed quietly. "I've been down so many roads that led nowhere. What if this is just another dead end?" Elon leaned forward, his voice steady but gentle. "John, life doesn't work in straight lines. You're going to face setbacks, doubts, and moments where you feel like giving up. But the difference now is that you don't have to do it alone. You've got support. You've got a team. And if you fall, we'll help you get back up. John's breath hitched, and he lowered his head. The emotions he'd been holding back for so long were now bubbling to the surface. For the first time in years, he felt a rush of vulnerability. He hadn't allowed himself to feel this way since his days in the military, when he had learned to suppress his emotions in order to survive. I don't know how to trust anyone anymore, John admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I've been hurt so many times. I don't know if I can trust you, or this whole thing. Elon didn't flinch. He understood better than anyone the weight of those words. He had been hurt, misunderstood, and doubted by so many in his own life. But he had always persevered. And now, he was determined to help John do the same. You don't have to trust me right away, John, Elon said softly. All I'm asking is that you give yourself the chance to trust yourself again. You don't have to have it all figured out. Just take one step at a time, and I'll be here to help you through it. John's hands trembled slightly as he finally tapped the screen of his phone, accepting the job offer. It was a small step, but in that moment, it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a reason to hope again. The next few days were a blur. John threw himself into his new role with the nonprofit, working alongside other veterans who were going through similar struggles. It wasn't easy, and there were times when he felt overwhelmed, but there was something different about this work. For the first time in years, he wasn't just a recipient of help, he was part of a community that was working to make a real difference. Meanwhile, Elon continued to follow John's progress, checking in regularly and offering support whenever needed. The media had largely moved on, focusing on the next big story, but Elon didn't care about the attention. What mattered now was the quiet victories, the small moments when John found his footing again. But despite the growing sense of hope, there were still obstacles to overcome. John was still haunted by his past, and even though he was surrounded by people who understood him, there were days when he felt like he was drowning. He still had a long way to go, and sometimes the weight of it all felt unbearable. One evening, after a long day of work, John sat in a small apartment, staring out the window. The city lights twinkled below, but it all felt distant, unreachable. He felt like an outsider, still unsure of where he belonged. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Elon. I know it's been tough, but I want you to know how proud I am of you. You're making a difference, not just in your own life, but in the lives of others. Keep pushing forward, one day at a time. John's eyes welled with tears. For so long, he had been angry, bitter, and lost, convinced that no one cared. But now, in this moment, he understood something he hadn't before. People did care. Elon cared. And maybe, just maybe, he could allow himself to care again. He wiped his eyes and texted back, "Thanks, Elon. I'm trying. I really am." But just as things seemed to be falling into place, another challenge arose, one that neither John nor Elon had seen coming. A new scandal had erupted, and this time, it involved the non-profit organization John was working for. Allegations of mismanagement and financial impropriety began to surface, and soon the organization's reputation was in jeopardy. John was devastated. He had just found his footing, and now everything seemed to be crumbling once again. The very people he was trying to help were being targeted, and he felt powerless to stop it. Elon was quick to reach out. "John, listen to me," he said on the phone, his voice firm but supportive. "This is not your fault. You've been doing incredible work, and you can't let this setback define you. What matters now is how you handle it. How you choose to move forward." John felt the weight of those words. It was easy to let setbacks break you, to let the world dictate your path. But Elon was right. It wasn't about the scandal. It was about how he responded to it. And he wasn't going to let this define him. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. Elon, ever the optimist, had made it clear from the start, he wouldn't let John face this alone. You've already proven what you're capable of, John. You've turned your life around in ways people couldn't have imagined. You can do this too, Elon said during one of their calls, his voice steady with conviction. John couldn't deny the truth in Elon's words, but he also couldn't shake the suffocating sense of helplessness. The nonprofit was his lifeline, a place that had given him a renewed sense of purpose, a feeling he hadn't had in years. But now it seemed as though everything was falling apart, as if his efforts were meaningless. The media hounded him, reporters camped out near his apartment, and people started questioning his integrity. Were the people around him genuinely interested in helping him, or was this just another step in Elon Musk's quest for good publicity? The doubts crept in. Still, John was determined to stay the course. He had already come too far to let this scandal define him. He knew that if he let himself be defeated by this latest hurdle, he would lose everything he had worked for, his dignity, his progress, his future. Elon knew that John was struggling, but he also knew that this moment was more than just a challenge. It was a test of character. John had come a long way from the homeless veteran who had been stuck in a vicious cycle of addiction and despair. This was a different man now, a man who had the strength to fight, to stand tall even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Elon decided that it was time for a bold move, something that would demonstrate his unwavering belief in John's potential, and send a message to the world that their work wasn't finished. He called a meeting with a select group of leaders and investors to discuss how to turn the tide. We need to pivot. This is not the end. This is the moment to prove to everyone that we are committed to creating lasting change, not just in John's life, but in the lives of countless others, Elon said, his voice resonating with a rare intensity. The media is focused on the scandal, but what we need to focus on is the work we've already done. We need to take the narrative back into our hands. The idea was simple but audacious. Elon proposed a new initiative that would put real, sustainable resources into the hands of veterans like John, an effort that would be transparent, direct, and above reproach. They would partner with the nonprofit to form a new initiative focused solely on veterans' rehabilitation, skill development, and job placement, with an emphasis on community involvement. John listened in on the call, his heart pounding. It was a massive undertaking, but the idea struck a chord deep within him. This wasn't just about fixing one nonprofit, it was about building something that could transform lives on a national scale. The next day, Elon took John out to lunch. They sat in a quiet, upscale restaurant, away from the prying eyes of the public. The tension between them had lifted somewhat, but the weight of the situation still lingered in the air. John took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About what's at stake here. Elon nodded, his expression thoughtful. This isn't just about you, John. It's about all the people who've been overlooked, discarded, and forgotten. The system doesn't work for them, but we can make it work. Together, we can build something that lasts. John rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he had developed over the years. But what if it's too much? What if I'm not cut out for this? What if I fail? Failure is part of the journey, Elon replied, his tone unwavering. You won't be doing this alone. You have a team now, and you have me. And I believe in you. John didn't have a response right away. He had heard words like this before, promises of support, but this time something felt different. There was no pretense in Elon's voice, no hidden agenda. For the first time in his life, John felt like he was truly part of something bigger than himself. I'm in, John said quietly, meeting Elon's gaze. Let's do it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The new initiative began to take shape, with Elon leading the charge to gather funding, resources, and partners. John was involved at every step, working closely with the team to create a comprehensive plan for veteran support that prioritized long-term recovery over short-term fixes. The focus would be on providing veterans with the skills and opportunities they needed to reintegrate into society and build sustainable careers. Despite the initial challenges, the initiative began to gain momentum. John's confidence grew with every meeting, every discussion with potential partners. He had become an advocate, not just for himself but for others who had walked the same difficult path. He was no longer the man he had been just months ago, lost, uncertain, and alone. He was now a leader, a mentor, someone who could inspire others to find hope in the midst of their own struggles. But as the initiative began to take shape, a new obstacle emerged. The nonprofit scandal was far from over, and now some of the organization's leaders were threatening to go public with sensitive information about the project. The pressure mounted, and the threat of an even bigger media storm loomed. Elon wasn't going to let this setback stop them, but he knew that they needed to act quickly to get ahead of the situation. We need to control the narrative. The last thing we need right now is for this scandal to derail everything we've worked for, he said during a call with his team. John, who had been listening in, felt the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders again. The fear of failure crept back into his mind, but this time, he was determined to face it head-on. He wasn't going to let the fear of the past control his future. As tensions rose and the threat of the scandal loomed over them, John made a decision that would change everything. With Elon's support, he prepared to take the fight public, to confront the allegations head-on and prove to the world that their efforts weren't just about saving one life, but about transforming an entire system. Would John's courage be enough to push through the storm? Would Elon's unwavering faith in him be the key to their success? Or would this new battle prove to be too much for both of them to handle? The next move would be critical, and the consequences, uncertain. The weight of the situation was unbearable. As John sat in a conference room with Elon, the rest of the team, and a few key investors, he felt the pressure closing in. The nonprofit scandal had become more than just a passing story, it was a ticking time bomb, and every second they waited to act felt like a step closer to total destruction. The media buzz had reached a fever pitch, and the dark cloud of public scrutiny loomed over their efforts like a storm ready to break. Here's the thing, Elon began, his voice cutting through the tense silence in the room. We cannot let this define us. The media will say what they want to say, but we know the truth. The work we're doing is real. It's impactful. And no amount of bad press can take that away. John listened carefully, but his mind kept drifting back to the scandal, back to the accusations, the leaks, and the mounting pressure. He couldn't help but feel that his hard-won progress was hanging by a thread. The whole world was watching, waiting for them to slip up. You're right, John finally said, his voice steady, though a knot twisted in his stomach. But what happens if it all falls apart? What if they succeed in tearing this down? Elon met his gaze with a steely determination. Then we rebuild. We pivot. But we do it with integrity. We stay true to what we're trying to do here, and we don't let the noise distract us. We keep our eyes on the mission. It was easier said than done. John had learned the hard way that trust could be fragile, and the world was quick to tear down anything that wasn't perfect. But this was different. They had a chance to prove that their mission wasn't just about avoiding failure, it was about fighting for something bigger than themselves. For the veterans who had been forgotten. For the future they could still create. Later that day, John stood outside, his back pressed against the cold brick wall of the building. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he wasn't sure he could bring himself to look at it. The media had been relentless, and it felt like every new headline was a reminder that his past might be impossible to outrun. He took a deep breath and pulled out his phone, glancing at the notifications. One of the messages stood out from the others, an email from an old friend who had served with him in Iraq. The subject line was simple, thinking of you. John's fingers hovered over the screen, his heart heavy with the weight of nostalgia. The email was brief, but it contained words that made his throat tighten. I saw the news, and I wanted to reach out. I know you're doing everything you can to make a difference, and I just want you to know that I'm proud of you. Keep going, brother. The words hit harder than he had expected. It was a small gesture, but it was just the encouragement he needed. Maybe there were still people who believed in him. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone in this fight as he thought. Elon appeared at his side, his presence a comforting reminder that he wasn't in this alone either. I know it's tough, but you've got the strength to get through this, Elon said, his voice soft yet resolute. We all do. John looked up at him, nodding slowly. Thanks, Elon. I appreciate it. I think I needed to hear that. Elon clapped him on the back. Anytime. Now let's get to work. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and strategy sessions. John, alongside Elon and the team, formulated a plan to take control of the narrative. They wouldn't just respond to the scandal, they would confront it head-on, showing the world that their mission wasn't just about public perception, it was about real, tangible change. Elon, who had navigated public scrutiny himself more times than he could count, was adamant about staying calm and composed. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, he reminded the team. What matters now is how we move forward. We're going to address the issues head-on, show transparency, and lead with integrity. John couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at Elon's ability to take a crisis and turn it into an opportunity. It wasn't just about damage control, it was about reclaiming their power. About proving that they wouldn't be defined by their setbacks. Let's go public with everything we've been working on, Elon decided. We'll hold a press conference, take questions, and show them the truth about what we're doing. We're not backing down. The day of the press conference arrived, and the nerves were palpable. John stood backstage, his palms sweaty, his heart racing. He had never been one for the spotlight. But today, there was no escaping it. Today, he would have to face the cameras, the questions, and the public eye. Elon, John said, his voice wavering slightly. What if they don't buy it? What if we say all the right things, but it's not enough? Elon looked at him, his eyes full of determination. It's not about what they believe right now. It's about what we know. We're doing the right thing. And that's all that matters. As the doors opened, John stepped out into the spotlight. The cameras flashed, the reporters murmured, and the weight of 1,000 questions hung in the air. Elon stood beside him, his presence a steadying force. The first question came fast. Mr. Musk, how do you respond to the allegations against your nonprofit organization? Elon took a deep breath before answering. We acknowledge the mistakes that have been made in the past. But we are committed to moving forward with transparency and accountability. We are here to make a real difference for veterans, people who have sacrificed everything for this country. The room grew quiet as Elon continued, detailing their new initiative and the steps they had taken to rebuild the nonprofit's reputation. He didn't shy away from the hard questions, addressing each one with honesty and unwavering conviction. John felt a wave of relief wash over him as the press conference continued. This wasn't easy, but it felt like the first real step toward taking back control. And as the cameras clicked and the questions continued to come, he realized something he hadn't before: this wasn't just about fixing the nonprofit. It was about proving to himself that he was worthy of this second chance. The press conference had gone well, but the true test was still ahead. The media would continue to scrutinize every move they made, and the scandal wasn't over. Would the public buy into their story, or would the nonprofit's shadow continue to haunt them? John had faced down his past, but now, he would have to face the future, one that was uncertain, fraught with challenges, and full of the kind of pressure he had never imagined. Would he be able to rise to the occasion? Or would the storm of public opinion prove too much for him to weather? The press conference had been a success, but as John stood there, watching the last of the reporters pack up their gear, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. The cameras had clicked, the questions had been answered, and for a brief moment, there had been a sense of relief. But underneath it all, he knew that the world wasn't going to let them off the hook so easily. The media was relentless, and their scrutiny would only intensify in the days to come. As the crowd dispersed, Elon turned to John, his expression unreadable but steady. "That went better than I expected," he said with a nod. John nodded back, but his mind was already racing ahead. "It went okay," he said, his voice low. "But we're not out of the woods yet. They're going to keep coming after us, trying to find any weakness." Elon gave him a reassuring smile. "Let them. We'll keep moving forward. The real work starts now." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. John and Elon continued to focus on the new initiative, meeting with veterans organizations, business partners, and potential donors. But the shadow of the scandal still hung over them. Despite their efforts to turn the narrative around, there was always that lingering doubt in the back of John's mind. Was this really going to work? Could they really change the world, or were they just putting a band-aid on a much larger problem? The media hadn't let up either. Every few days, there was a new headline, a new story, a new angle to the controversy. The constant barrage of negative press began to wear on John. He couldn't help but read every article, listen to every podcast, and watch every news segment that mentioned him. It was like a sickness, and he couldn't stop feeding into it. But each time, it chipped away at his resolve just a little more. One evening, as John sat in his small apartment, scrolling through his phone, Elon called. "Hey, John, how are you holding up?" Elon's voice was calm, but there was a note of concern there that John hadn't heard before. "I'm fine," John replied, but his tone betrayed him. "Just tired, you know. The media, it's like they're everywhere." "I get it," Elon said, his voice sympathetic. "But you can't let it get to you. It's the job of the media to find problems, to dig for dirt. But you've got something they don't have." John frowned, unsure of where Elon was going. "What's that?" "Elon Musk's support," he said with a grin that could be heard through the phone. "They can say whatever they want, but I'm in your corner. And I believe in what we're doing here." For the first time in days, John allowed himself to breathe a little easier. It wasn't about the headlines, or what the world thought about them, it was about the mission. And if he could keep his eyes on that, maybe, just maybe, he could push through all the noise. Despite the mounting pressure, they kept moving forward. The new initiative, focused on empowering veterans and giving them the tools to rebuild their lives, was gaining traction. They secured partnerships with several large companies, including some that had been hesitant at first. Elon's name, of course, carried weight. But it was John's story that inspired people. His transformation from a homeless veteran to an advocate for change was a testament to the power of second chances. One day, John received an email that made his heart skip a beat. It was from a veteran he had never met, someone who had read about the initiative and wanted to get involved. "I've been struggling for years, man. I saw your story on the news, and I knew I had to reach out. If you're serious about helping veterans like me, I'm ready to do whatever it takes to make it work." John stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling a surge of emotion he wasn't sure how to process. This was it. This was the reason they were doing all of this, the veterans who had been left behind, who had been forgotten. He didn't care about the media. He didn't care about the scandal. What mattered now was making this work for people like the one who had written him. He replied quickly, his fingers moving with purpose. "I'm serious. And you're not alone. We're doing this together." But just as things were beginning to look up, the storm rumbled again. A new round of negative press surfaced, with allegations that the nonprofit's new initiative was just a front for more publicity stunts. A well-known critic of Elon Musk published an op-ed accusing him of using John's story as a way to boost his own brand, and soon, the headline was everywhere. "Here we go again," John muttered, reading the article with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Elon called later that afternoon, his tone businesslike but calm. "It's just another distraction. Don't let it derail you. We've been through worse." John leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. I'm trying, but it's hard. It feels like every time we take one step forward, something pulls us back 2 steps. I know. But remember this, we're in this for the long haul. The media loves a good scandal, but it doesn't define who we are. It never has. John stared out the window, watching the world go by. Elon was right, of course. The world would always be quick to judge, quick to tear down what they didn't understand. But he couldn't let that stop him. Not now. Not when so many people were depending on him to keep going. As John sat in the quiet of his apartment, the weight of the world pressing down on him, he received another message, this one from a source he hadn't expected. A powerful investor who had been closely following the nonprofit's journey wanted to meet in person. They had a proposition that could change everything. But as John prepared to meet with this investor, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this offer than met the eye. Was this the break they needed? Or was it yet another trap, another hurdle in the road? The answers he was about to find out would have far-reaching consequences, not just for the initiative, but for his own future. John sat at his desk, staring at the blinking cursor on his laptop screen. The email from the investor lingered in his inbox, its subject line promising a meeting that could change everything. His mind was racing, torn between excitement and wariness. He had been on the receiving end of a lot of offers over the years, but this one felt different. There was something about it that made his skin prickle with anticipation. Or was it fear? The investor, a well-known philanthropist and businessman named David Marshall, had made a name for himself by backing high-profile, game-changing initiatives. He was the type of person whose endorsement could elevate an organization from local to national, and perhaps even international, overnight. His words in the email had been simple but compelling, let's talk. I believe in what you're doing, and I think I can help. Meet me tomorrow at my office. John's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered the implications of this meeting. An investment from someone like David could provide the financial stability the nonprofit desperately needed to continue its work. It could open doors to greater resources, more partnerships, and ultimately, a chance to make an even bigger impact on the lives of veterans. But there was always a catch. There always was. The next morning, John found himself standing in front of a sleek, modern building in downtown Los Angeles. The glass walls of the building reflected the morning sun, casting a golden hue over the streets. As he walked through the lobby, the quiet hum of the city outside seemed distant. Inside, everything was polished, pristine. It felt like stepping into a different world, one where money and power ruled, where decisions were made in boardrooms like this one, where lives could change with the stroke of a pen. David Marshall's office was on the top floor, and John was led up by a young assistant who greeted him with a warm smile. She knocked lightly before opening the door, revealing the man himself. David was seated behind an enormous glass desk, his sharp eyes trained on John as he entered. He looked exactly like the kind of person who had everything, confident, composed, and in control. Yet there was something in his gaze that made John uneasy, as if the man was sizing him up, measuring his worth. John, it's a pleasure to finally meet you, David said with a firm handshake. I've been following your work closely, and I have to say, I'm impressed by what you've accomplished so far. Not many people could rise from the ashes the way you have. John nodded, keeping his emotions in check. Thank you. It's been a long road, but we're doing everything we can to make a difference. David gestured for him to sit, and the assistant quickly brought over a glass of water before disappearing from the room. The two men were alone now. I won't waste your time, John, David began, his tone measured and direct. I've been looking for a cause to invest in, something meaningful. Something that will make a real impact, not just on paper, but in the lives of real people. Your nonprofit caught my attention because it's got heart. And you've got heart too. That's rare. John could feel a tension building in his chest. The praise was flattering, but the underlying message was clear, David was a businessman, and everything came with a price. "Thank you," John said, trying to remain neutral. "But what exactly are you offering?" David smiled, as if he had been waiting for that question. "I want to help you take this to the next level. I'm offering you a significant investment, enough to expand your operations nationwide, to build stronger partnerships, and to create a lasting legacy. All I ask in return is a seat at the table. I want to be more than just a donor. I want to have a say in the direction of the organization." John's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment, the opportunity he had dreamed of. But the price was steep. A seat at the table meant giving up some control, compromising on the vision he had fought so hard to preserve. He had worked tirelessly to make sure that the mission stayed true to its purpose, to the veterans they were serving. Would this investor's influence change that? I appreciate the offer, but I need to know more," John said, his voice cautious. "How exactly would you want to influence the direction of the nonprofit?" David leaned forward slightly, his hands folding neatly on the desk. "It's simple, really. I believe we can achieve more if we open up the scope of the organization. I want to help you scale it. I want us to focus on veterans not just in this city, but across the country. We can partner with government agencies, increase corporate sponsorships, and maybe even get some celebrities involved. The sky's the limit, John." John's mind raced. The possibility of reaching more veterans, helping more people, was tempting. But something about the way David spoke, so assured, so focused on growth, made John wary. He had seen too many organizations lose their way when profit became the driving force. He didn't want the soul of the nonprofit to be sacrificed for numbers. "And what do you expect from me in return?" John asked, keeping his voice steady. David smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I expect to be involved in the decision-making process. I want to make sure we're prioritizing the right partnerships, the right kind of media exposure, and the right kind of strategy. With my experience and resources, we could turn this into a household name. But it'll take more than just a passion for the cause, it'll take a strong business strategy." There it was, the catch. John could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. On one hand, this could be the breakthrough the nonprofit needed. On the other hand, it could be the beginning of a slippery slope, one that could lead them away from their original mission. Could he afford to compromise on his values? David must have sensed John's hesitation because he leaned back in his chair, giving him some space to think. "You don't have to decide right now," David said. "Take some time. Talk it over with your team. But know that I'm serious. This is a rare opportunity." John nodded, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He had dreamed of a day when they would have the resources to truly make a difference. But at what cost? As John left David's office, he couldn't shake the feeling that the decision ahead of him wasn't just about the nonprofit, it was about who he wanted to be. Did he want to be the man who took the money and scaled the organization into something bigger, but possibly less authentic? Or did he want to stay true to the original mission, even if it meant struggling in the shadows? The weight of the decision was almost too much to bear. He needed advice, but who could he trust? Would he make the right choice, or would this offer change everything in ways he never expected? The future of the nonprofit, and his own peace of mind, hung in the balance. John paced back and forth in his small apartment, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The meeting with David Marshall had stirred up a whirlwind of emotions. The offer was tantalizing, an influx of resources, the chance to help countless veterans, and the opportunity to grow the nonprofit in ways he had only dreamed of. But there was also a sinking feeling in his gut, a nagging sense that this offer might come with a price far higher than he was willing to pay. The phone call with Elon earlier that day had done little to ease his mind. Elon had been supportive, as always, encouraging him to think carefully about the decision. But even Elon's reassurance couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right about David's proposal. John's phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Lily, his close friend and the one person he trusted more than anyone else. They had been through thick and thin together. Lily had been by his side when he was living on the streets, and it was her encouragement that had ultimately led him to pursue this path of helping veterans. If there was anyone who could help him make sense of this, it was her. "Hey, I've been thinking about that offer. Do you want to grab coffee tomorrow and talk it through?" John's heart gave a little flutter of relief. Lily always knew how to ground him, how to see through the noise and help him focus on what truly mattered. He quickly typed back a response. "Yes, please. I need to clear my head. Let's meet at the usual spot at noon." The next day, the coffee shop they frequented was buzzing with the usual chatter, but for John, the noise felt distant. He sat at their usual corner table, staring out the window, his thoughts a tangled mess. The weight of the decision seemed heavier today, the uncertainty gnawing at him with every passing minute. Lily arrived, her presence immediately comforting. She slid into the chair across from him, offering him a warm smile, but John could see the concern in her eyes. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly, her tone laced with empathy. John sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, Lily. I keep thinking about what David said, and part of me feels like this is the opportunity I've been waiting for. But another part of me, I don't know if I can trust him. His vision doesn't align with what I've been working for. I want to help veterans, but I don't want to lose sight of what we're really doing." Lily nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup as she thought carefully. "I get it. It's a huge decision. But you've always had a good sense of what's right for the mission. You've always stayed true to your values. Don't let someone else steer the ship if it's going to take you off course." John leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the steam rising from his coffee. "I've worked so hard to get to this point. To help people, to give them what they need. But what if I'm turning away the chance to make a real difference? What if David's right? Maybe I'm limiting myself, and I need to think bigger." Lily met his gaze, her eyes filled with understanding. "I hear you. And I think you're right, there's a chance to do something huge. But ask yourself this, what's the cost? Is it worth it if it means losing control over what's important to you? The reason this nonprofit works is because you've kept it personal, because you've kept it real. You don't want to lose that." John's chest tightened as he listened to her words. It was what he had been trying to avoid, but it was staring him right in the face. If he accepted David's offer, would he still be the person who had started this journey? Or would he become a puppet in someone else's game? "I've spent so much of my life fighting for control over my own fate," John murmured, his voice tinged with frustration. "And now, it feels like I might have to give up that control to move forward. It's like I'm stuck between two worlds." Lily reached across the table and placed a hand over his. "You don't have to decide right now. And you don't have to do it alone. You've got a team, people who believe in you. Don't forget that." John looked into her eyes, feeling a surge of gratitude. Lily had always been there for him, offering unwavering support, even when things seemed impossible. She wasn't telling him what to do, but she was reminding him of the person he had been, and the person he still was, deep down. "I just want to make sure that when I look back on this, I know I did the right thing," John said quietly. "I don't want to lose my way." Lily gave him a small, encouraging smile. "You won't. You've come too far. Just remember why you started. And don't let anyone forget why you're doing this in the first place." The conversation with Lily left John feeling more centered, though the decision was still looming large in his mind. He knew he couldn't avoid it forever. But for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of clarity. This wasn't just about the money or the exposure or the partnerships. This was about staying true to the mission, about helping veterans in a way that mattered, not just as a business opportunity, but as a human one. The next morning, John sent David Marshall an email, requesting a follow-up meeting. He didn't have the answers yet, but he knew he needed more time. He wasn't ready to jump into anything, and he wasn't going to let anyone pressure him into making a decision that didn't feel right. He needed to hear David's vision again, to ask the hard questions and see if they were truly aligned. But as the email sent and the weight of the decision still lingered, John couldn't help but wonder, was this the turning point he had been waiting for, or was it just another fork in the road, leading him down a path he would regret? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? John couldn't shake the ominous feeling that clung to him after the phone call. The voice on the other end had been frantic, but vague, and it left him with more questions than answers. We need to talk. Something big is about to happen, and you need to know what's coming. That was all the person had said before abruptly hanging up. No explanation. No context. Just a sense of urgency that felt all too real. He sat back down at his kitchen table, the weight of the situation pressing in on him. The timing was strange, he was already struggling with the decision regarding David Marshall's offer. Now, this? Whatever it was, it seemed to be pulling him in two different directions at once. His phone buzzed again, snapping him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. He hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. John. The voice on the other end was familiar, but strained. It took a moment for him to recognize it. Marcus? John said, his voice tightening. Marcus had been one of the first veterans he'd helped when he started the nonprofit. They'd stayed in touch over the years, and he knew Marcus had always been one of the most reliable sources of information about what was going on in the community. I need you to listen carefully, Marcus said, his voice urgent. Something's going down. I don't have all the details, but I've been hearing things, big things. It's got to do with the project David Marshall's been working on. You've got to know what's coming, John. This isn't just about business. It's about control. And once they get what they want, it's not just your organization that's at risk. It's the whole community. John's heart rate quickened as he processed the words. What do you mean, Marcus? What's going on? Marcus hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a low voice, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. I've got ears on the ground, John. People in the know. David Marshall, he's not who he says he is. He's been pulling strings behind the scenes for a while now, and he's got plans. Big plans. But it's not just about helping veterans. This is about building an empire, and you're part of it whether you like it or not. John's mind was spinning. The idea that David Marshall might have ulterior motives had been a whisper in the back of his mind, but hearing it from Marcus, someone he trusted, made it feel all too real. What kind of empire? John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What's he really after? I don't know all the specifics, but I do know this, David Marshall is a businessman first, and he sees veterans as an investment. He doesn't care about the cause, not like you do. He cares about power, influence, and expanding his reach. And if you take his money, you'll be signing away control over everything you've built. He's already got people in positions of power. If you're not careful, you'll be swallowed up in it. And the veterans will be the ones who suffer. John's thoughts raced as he absorbed Marcus's words. This was everything he had feared. He had been so focused on the opportunity to help more people, to expand the nonprofit, that he hadn't stopped to consider the true cost of that expansion. If David Marshall wasn't committed to the cause, if he was only interested in using the nonprofit as a stepping stone for his own gain, then everything John had worked for could be in jeopardy. Marcus, I need more. What exactly is he planning? You can't just tell me this and leave me hanging, John said, his voice shaking with frustration. I'm trying, man, Marcus said, his voice pained. I don't have all the pieces, but I know enough to tell you this, don't get involved with David. You've built something real here. Something that's making a difference. Don't let him take that from you. There's more at play than just a partnership or an investment. It's about control. And once you're in, it's hard to get out. John's mind reeled as he processed everything Marcus had just told him. If what Marcus was saying was true, then David Marshall's offer wasn't just a business deal, it was a trap. A carefully orchestrated plan to take over everything John had worked for. "I appreciate you letting me know, Marcus," John said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "I'm going to need some time to figure this out. But trust me, I won't let him take control of what we've built. I'm not backing down." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "I knew I could count on you, John. Just be careful. I don't trust anyone who comes with an offer that sounds too good to be true. Especially someone like him." After hanging up, John sat in silence, his thoughts swirling. The decision he had been grappling with just moments before now felt even more complicated. The stakes were higher than ever. David Marshall's offer wasn't just about growth, it was about control. John knew that taking David's money would mean sacrificing something precious, the heart and soul of the nonprofit. He couldn't allow that to happen. Not after everything they had fought for. John spent the next few days in a haze, grappling with the weight of Marcus's warning. The follow-up meeting with David Marshall loomed large, and John knew it would be the moment of truth. He had to confront David directly and get to the bottom of his true intentions. But as the meeting drew closer, an unexpected turn of events threatened to derail everything. Late one night, John received an anonymous tip that the very foundation of his nonprofit might be under attack from forces he hadn't even considered. Someone within the organization was leaking information, and David Marshall might not be the only one playing a dangerous game. The truth was about to come to light, but at what cost? And would John's fight to protect the veterans lead him into an even darker web than he could have imagined? John barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, Marcus's words echoed in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something big was closing in on him. The nonprofit he had poured his heart into for so long, everything he had built, was now at risk. The idea of losing control, of allowing someone with such ulterior motives to dictate the future of his mission, felt like a gut punch. But it wasn't just David Marshall who was troubling him now. After receiving that anonymous tip, John's unease grew into something much more tangible. Someone within his own organization, someone he trusted, was leaking information. He had no idea who it could be, but the thought that one of his own might be sabotaging the very thing they had all worked for left him feeling betrayed, paranoid, and completely out of control. John spent the entire next day digging through files, sifting through emails, and reviewing messages for any sign of who might be behind the leak. But everything appeared clean. Nothing out of the ordinary. No suspicious activity. No obvious betrayal. But then came the phone call. It was late in the evening, and John was at his desk, staring at his computer screen, wondering what to do next. His phone rang, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. He answered it on the second ring. "John," the voice on the other end said, low and urgent. "Who's this?" John replied, his pulse quickening. "I don't have much time," the voice continued. "Listen carefully. I'm the one who sent the tip about the leak. I can't stay on the line long, but I need you to know something. It's not just one person leaking information. There's a group. A group inside your organization working with David Marshall. They've been feeding him intel for months, using your name to get close to him, to manipulate him into offering you that deal. But it's all part of a bigger plan." John's stomach dropped. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of the gravity of what he was hearing. "Who is it? Who's behind this?" John demanded, his voice trembling. "I can't give you names, John. Not yet. But it's not just about money. This is bigger. You're not just fighting for the future of your nonprofit, you're fighting for your life. They'll stop at nothing to take control. Trust no one." Before John could respond, the line went dead. The phone went silent in his hand as he stared at the screen, his mind reeling. A group? Inside his own organization? Working with David Marshall? Everything was starting to crumble. His entire world was being turned upside down. He didn't know who to trust anymore. The people he had once seen as allies could very well be the ones behind this plot. His heart pounded in his chest as he began to wonder just how deep the betrayal went. The next morning, John arrived at the office early, trying to shake off the exhaustion that had settled into his bones. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he knew one thing for sure: he had to find out who was behind this, and he had to do it fast. His nonprofit was on the brink of disaster, and if he didn't act quickly, everything he had worked for might be lost forever. He walked into his office, the familiar sight of his desk and paperwork doing little to calm his nerves. The building felt colder than usual, the quiet hum of the lights overhead almost mocking him as he sat down. He ran a hand through his hair and reached for his phone to call Lily, but before he could dial, his door creaked open. It was Kate, his operations manager. She stepped into the room, her face pale, her eyes filled with something that made John's heart drop into his stomach. There was a hesitation in her stance, a wariness that John hadn't noticed before. "John, we need to talk," she said quietly, her voice shaking just enough for John to hear it. John's instincts flared. "About what?" Kate took a deep breath and closed the door behind her. She sat down across from him, avoiding eye contact. John felt his pulse race as a sinking feeling settled in. Something was wrong. I've been meaning to tell you something," she stammered, clearly struggling with whatever was weighing on her. "But I didn't know how. I never meant for it to go this far, but it's happening, and I'm scared, John." John leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Kate, what are you talking about?" She hesitated for a long moment, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. "It's me. I'm the one who's been feeding David Marshall information." John's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't process the words at first. His mind was still reeling from the phone call, and now it was Kate. His operations manager. The one person he had trusted implicitly. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kate finally looked him in the eye, and her expression was filled with regret, but also fear. "I didn't want to. But David, he promised me something that I couldn't ignore. He said he would make sure I had everything I needed, everything I've ever wanted. I didn't think it would go this far, but now I see the damage it's caused, and I don't know how to fix it." John stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. His heart was pounding in his chest, and the anger was rising, threatening to boil over. "You've been working with him this whole time. How could you do this to me, to all of us?" Kate's voice cracked. "I didn't think I had a choice. He had leverage over me. And now I know I've made a terrible mistake. But John, I need you to understand, it wasn't just about me. It's about something bigger than both of us." John's head was spinning. The betrayal was more than just personal, it was an attack on everything he had worked for. And now, he had to make a choice. Would he expose Kate, the one person who had been a part of his team for years, or would he find a way to salvage what was left of his organization? "I don't know what to believe anymore, Kate," he said, his voice cold with the weight of the situation. "But we have to fix this. We have to stop this before it destroys everything." As the conversation ended, John's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "You think you can stop this? You can't. It's already too late." The words burned into his mind as the full scope of what was happening began to unfold. Was this just the beginning of a much darker conspiracy? John knew that the truth was more elusive than ever, and the clock was ticking. The message John received sent a shiver down his spine. "You think you can stop this? You can't. It's already too late." The words seemed to hang in the air, mocking him as he stared at his phone. Whoever was behind this knew something he didn't, something dangerous and all-encompassing. He clenched his fist, his thoughts racing, trying to make sense of it all. Too late. John muttered to himself. The phrase echoed in his mind, repeating with a sense of finality that made his blood run cold. Was it true? Had he already lost control? Was there a larger conspiracy at play, one that reached farther than he had ever imagined? Kate's confession had torn through him like a knife. The realization that someone so close to him, someone he had trusted, had betrayed him, had been feeding information to David Marshall and his team, felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for. But even worse was the fact that Kate wasn't alone. The message from the anonymous tipster had made it clear, there was a group within his organization, and they had been working with Marshall from the very beginning. John had always prided himself on building a team of people who shared his vision, people who cared about veterans and the mission they were fighting for. But now, it seemed like that vision had been shattered. The truth felt like a slap in the face. Sitting in his office, John tried to focus, tried to come up with a plan. But every time he thought he had a grip on the situation, the walls seemed to close in tighter. The clock was ticking, and he knew that he couldn't afford to waste any more time. His nonprofit, the organization that had become his life's work, was under threat, if not from external forces, then from within. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. John looked up to see Lily standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "John, we need to talk," she said softly, stepping inside. John gestured for her to sit down, his mind still racing. "What's going on, Lily?" She hesitated for a moment, then sat across from him, her brow furrowed with worry. "I've been getting reports. People are talking. People in the organization, some of the staff members are starting to get suspicious. They've noticed the tension. They're wondering what's really going on, what we're really working toward." John leaned back in his chair, exhaling a long breath. He had been so focused on the internal betrayal that he hadn't considered the external fallout. The truth was getting harder and harder to hide. How could he protect the legacy of the nonprofit when even his own team was questioning the integrity of the organization? "They're asking questions I don't have answers to, John," Lily continued, her voice growing more frantic. "They're wondering why you're meeting with David Marshall. They've heard rumors about his involvement in something shady. They're starting to question everything, and I don't know how much longer we can keep it under wraps." John's mind spun. The whispers outside his office were turning into shouts, and the cracks in his foundation were becoming impossible to ignore. "I know," he said quietly. "And I can't lie to them anymore, Lily. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine. We're in deep, and I don't know how to fix it. I thought David Marshall was someone who could help us grow, but I was wrong. I made a mistake." Lily's eyes softened, but the concern didn't fade. "What are we going to do?" John didn't have an answer for her. How could he? He had always prided himself on being able to navigate difficult situations, but this was unlike anything he had faced before. David Marshall's offer wasn't just a bad business decision, it was a ticking time bomb that had already started to explode. "We need to find out who's behind this," John said, his voice growing more resolute. "We need to know exactly what's going on and who else is involved. And we need to act fast before it's too late." Lily nodded, her determination matching his. "I'll help however I can. We need to get to the truth, John. For the sake of the organization and everyone who's counting on us." John felt a flicker of hope, though it was small. At least he wasn't alone in this fight. But even with Lily's support, the path ahead was uncertain. Whoever was behind this conspiracy had already set the wheels in motion, and John knew that the battle wouldn't be over until he confronted David Marshall, and whoever else was pulling the strings. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. John, Lily, and a few trusted members of the team began investigating the depths of the betrayal. They checked financial records, combed through emails, and interviewed anyone who might know something. Every lead seemed to take them in a circle, and every step forward felt like a step into darkness. Then, the breakthrough came. Late one night, John was reviewing a series of emails when something caught his eye. One email, buried deep in a chain, had an attachment that looked suspiciously like a contract that included the names of several people from the organization, including Kate. And there, in the fine print, was David Marshall's signature. John's heart raced as he read through the document. It was clear now, David Marshall had already secured his hold over the nonprofit, and he had done so through manipulation and deceit. But this was bigger than just David. The conspiracy went deeper than John had anticipated. The contract wasn't just about money. It outlined control over every aspect of the organization, from staffing to decision-making. It was a strategic takeover. And the worst part? It was signed months ago, right after John's first meeting with David. John's breath caught in his throat as the weight of the situation sank in. He wasn't just fighting for control of the nonprofit, he was fighting for his future. And with each passing moment, the odds stacked higher against him. As John sat there, staring at the document, a new message flashed on his phone. This one wasn't from an unknown number, it was from Marcus. "You need to act fast, John. They're closing in on you. You're not just fighting for your organization anymore. You're fighting for your life. Marshall isn't just playing a game. He's in it for keeps." The words were like a slap to the face. John knew that the final confrontation was inevitable, but he didn't know how it would unfold. And worse, he didn't know who he could trust anymore. The days following the discovery of the contract felt like a countdown to a final showdown, a game of chess where the stakes were his nonprofit, his reputation, and his very future. John couldn't ignore the urgency that gripped him now. He was being played, and worse yet, he had no idea who else was involved in this dangerous game. The emails, the tip-off, the phone calls, everything had been pointing toward one thing: he was not just fighting for control of his organization. He was fighting for survival. The document from David Marshall wasn't just a business agreement, it was a weapon. It had been carefully crafted to ensure that no matter what happened, Marshall would have the upper hand. John had spent the past few days poring over every detail, trying to find a crack, a loophole, something he could use to his advantage. But the more he read, the more he realized that David had thought of everything. The nonprofit had been carefully constructed to look like it was still in John's hands, but in reality, Marshall had already taken control. The layers of influence, the manipulation, David Marshall had outsmarted him at every turn. Now, with the clock ticking down, John knew it was time to confront him. John sat in his office that evening, the quiet hum of the air conditioning the only sound. Lily had been busy coordinating with other key staff members, trying to prepare for whatever might come next. But John couldn't shake the feeling that this was it, the moment when everything would change. He knew the risks of confronting Marshall head-on. It could be the end of everything he had worked for, but what other choice did he have? The longer he waited, the tighter the grip around his neck would become. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. It was a message from Marcus. "Are you ready for this? Marshall won't go down without a fight. Don't let him corner you. Keep your eyes open." John's heart skipped a beat. He had been hoping for some kind of solution, some twist of fate that would allow him to avoid the confrontation. But Marcus's words only confirmed what he already knew: there was no escape. It was time. He took a deep breath, stood up, and grabbed his coat. Tonight, he was going to face David Marshall. The meeting had been arranged through the usual channels, a discreet location away from the prying eyes of the media and his staff. John wasn't sure what to expect. Marshall was unpredictable, calculating, and dangerous. But one thing was for sure: John couldn't afford to show weakness. He had to stand his ground. When he arrived at the sleek, upscale hotel where the meeting was scheduled, the tension was almost unbearable. John's shoes echoed loudly on the marble floor as he made his way to the elevator. The walls seemed to close in around him, and his thoughts raced. He had prepared for this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, everything felt too real. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and he stepped out onto the top floor. A long hallway stretched before him, illuminated by soft, warm lighting. At the end of the hall, a door opened, and he was greeted by a cold, calculating smile. David Marshall stood there, dressed in his usual perfectly tailored suit, his posture exuding confidence. He was exactly as John remembered, charming, disarming, yet underneath it all, there was a ruthless edge that John couldn't ignore. "John," David said, his voice smooth, almost pleasant. "I was wondering when you'd show up. Come in." John stepped into the room, trying to keep his composure. The room was opulent, with rich leather chairs, a glass table, and a view that overlooked the city. But it felt suffocating. There was no comfort here, just a predator's lair. "You've been busy," John said, his voice steady but cold. "I know what you've been doing, David. I know about the contract. And I know about Kate. You've been playing me from the very beginning." David chuckled, as if John had just told a joke. "I'm impressed you figured it out, John. I didn't think you had it in you. But I suppose it's only natural, isn't it? You were always so idealistic. So trusting. But this is business, John. People do what they need to do to survive." John took a step forward, his fists clenched. "You're not just in this for the business, David. You're in this for power. You want to control everything, this organization, my life. And I won't let you." David's smile never faltered, but his eyes narrowed. "You think I'm the villain here, don't you? But you're wrong. I'm giving you an opportunity, John. An opportunity to save your organization, to make it thrive. All I'm asking is that you trust me. Sign the deal, and I'll help you. I'll make you a success beyond your wildest dreams. You've already taken everything from me." John snapped, his voice rising. "You've manipulated everyone around me, you've betrayed me, and now you're trying to twist this into a deal I can't refuse. Well, it's not happening. You're not going to get away with it." David's demeanor shifted slightly. He leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. "You don't get it, John. This is already over. The contract is signed. The pieces are in place. Your people are mine now. There's nothing you can do to stop this." John's pulse quickened. This was it. He was up against a man who had no intentions of backing down, no intentions of playing fair. But John was done being manipulated. He had to fight back, no matter what it took. "I'll find a way," John said, his voice unwavering. "And when I do, you'll wish you never crossed me." David stood up slowly, smoothing his suit. "You're welcome to try. But remember, John, you're in my world now." As John walked out of the hotel, he felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but at the same time, the fight was far from over. The confrontation had made it clear that David Marshall wasn't just a businessman, he was a predator who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. But John wasn't going to let him win. Not without a fight. He didn't know what his next move would be, but he knew one thing, he wasn't giving up without a battle. As John stepped into his car, his phone buzzed again. It was an encrypted message from Marcus. "You need to move quickly, John. They're closing in on you faster than you realize. The game has changed, and it's no longer just about your nonprofit. You're a target now." The weight of Marcus's words hit John like a freight train. The stakes had been raised. And now, it wasn't just the future of his organization at risk, it was his life. The days that followed the confrontation with David Marshall were filled with a growing sense of dread. John's mind was constantly buzzing with the implications of what had just transpired. He knew that David wasn't someone to back down easily, but what he hadn't anticipated was the subtle, insidious war that had already begun. It was no longer about a business deal or control over his nonprofit, it was a battle for everything he had built, his entire identity, and possibly his life. He couldn't afford to sit idly by and wait for Marshall to make his next move. He needed to be proactive, gather the necessary allies, and dig even deeper into the conspiracy that had been slowly unraveling around him. His nonprofit had been built on the backs of so many people who trusted him, his team, his supporters, and most importantly, the veterans they helped. John couldn't let it all fall apart. Lily was the first to check in after the meeting with Marshall. She had been anxiously awaiting news, and when John finally reached out to her, her voice was full of concern. "How did it go?" she asked softly. "What did he say?" John paused for a moment, weighing his words carefully. "It's worse than I thought, Lily. Marshall already has everything he needs. The contract is just the beginning. He's pulled strings I didn't even know existed. The people around me are compromised. And now, he's making his move." Lily's silence spoke volumes. She was no longer just a colleague, she was his ally, his confidant in this fight. "So, what do we do now? How do we stop him?" John's heart weighed heavy as he thought about the answer. He didn't know how to stop David Marshall, at least not yet. But he knew one thing for sure, he couldn't do it alone. In the days that followed, John's world seemed to grow smaller and smaller. Every phone call, every email, every encounter felt loaded with suspicion. He couldn't trust anyone, not completely. It was an exhausting mental game, one where every action had to be calculated and every conversation carefully measured. Marshall had people everywhere, watching and waiting for any opportunity to strike. But there was one glimmer of hope, a sliver of light in the midst of all the chaos. Marcus, the former ally who had turned into something of a rogue agent in this battle, had been reaching out to John intermittently. His messages, cryptic as they were, had been his only source of real intelligence. And this time, Marcus had a plan. "We need to meet. There's something I found, something that could help you. Marshall's plans go deeper than you realize, and I think I know how to stop him. But we need to act fast." John had no choice but to trust Marcus. The urgency in his words was impossible to ignore. They arranged to meet in a secluded, undisclosed location, far from the eyes of the people who could be watching. As John made his way to the meeting, a wave of unease washed over him. The sense of impending danger was palpable. The warehouse was cold, and the dim light hanging overhead flickered intermittently. It wasn't much of a setting for a meeting that could potentially change everything, but John didn't care. All he cared about was finding a way to get ahead of Marshall. Marcus was waiting for him, his face shadowed by the hood of his jacket. As soon as John stepped inside, he motioned for him to sit down. "I've been digging through the records," Marcus began, his voice low and urgent. "There's more to this than just you and Marshall. He's got people on the inside. People who've been feeding him information. And I've found something." John leaned forward, trying to keep his composure. "What did you find?" Marcus slid a folder across the table. "This." He opened it slowly, revealing a series of documents, financial statements, contracts, and photos. At the center of the pile was a name John didn't recognize, Ryan Lawson. "Who's this?" John asked, his finger tracing the name. "What does he have to do with any of this?" Marcus looked at John with a grave expression. "Ryan Lawson is more than just a name. He's the key to everything. He's been pulling strings behind the scenes, working with Marshall to gain influence over your nonprofit. He's an investor. A silent partner. And he's been funneling money to Marshall's operation from the very beginning." John's mind reeled. He had never heard of Ryan Lawson before. How had someone like him slipped under his radar? "This is bad," John muttered, his mind racing. "This explains everything. The sudden influx of funding, the way Marshall always had an answer to every problem. It wasn't just him, he had someone else backing him all along. Marcus nodded, his face grim. Exactly. And what's worse, Lawson's connections run deep. He's got ties to some very powerful people in the government, in business, and in the media. He's the one who's been orchestrating the entire thing. John's stomach sank. This was a whole new level of danger, one he hadn't even considered. Marshall was bad enough, but a shadowy figure like Ryan Lawson, with the power and resources to manipulate everything from behind the scenes. That was a threat that could destroy everything John had fought for. We need to expose him, John said, his voice firm with determination. But we need more than just these documents. We need proof. We need to bring this into the light before it's too late. Marcus gave him a sharp look. It's going to be risky. Lawson's not someone you can just take down easily. But I think I know how to get the evidence we need. There's a meeting happening soon, one that involves Marshall and Lawson. It's our chance to get close and get the proof we need. John nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The fight was about to go public, and the stakes had never been higher. As Marcus handed John a flash drive containing a file that would change everything, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. He had no idea who else might be listening, watching, or planning their next move. And as he walked out of the warehouse, a car pulled up to the curb. He froze, recognizing the face behind the wheel. It was Kate. John's heart skipped a beat as Kate's car came to a slow stop in front of him. The familiar face behind the wheel sent a wave of mixed emotions crashing over him. Kate, the woman he thought he had lost forever, was back. But why? And what did her sudden reappearance mean for everything he had been fighting for? He stood frozen for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened in the last few days bearing down on him. It wasn't just about the war with Marshall anymore, it was about the relationships that had been torn apart, the betrayals, and the scars that still lingered beneath the surface. Kate was a part of that history. A part he had never quite been able to let go of. The car door opened with a soft click, and Kate stepped out, her face a mixture of uncertainty and resolve. She wasn't the same woman he had once known. The years, the challenges, had changed her. But there was something in her eyes, a glimmer of hope that made John wonder if they could ever go back to what they had. "John," Kate said, her voice steady but tinged with something deeper. "We need to talk." John looked at her for a long moment, his mind racing. "About what? After everything that's happened, why would you show up now?" Kate took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. "Because I know what's really going on, John. I know about Marshall. About the contract. And I know that I'm the one who can help you." John's stomach turned. The last time they had spoken, Kate had been one of the people closest to him, a confidant. But things had changed since then. Marshall's web of lies, the manipulation, it had taken its toll on everyone. John didn't know if he could trust her. "Not anymore. You're involved in this somehow, aren't you?" John said, his voice tight with suspicion. "You disappeared, and now you show up, claiming to have answers. You've been working with him, haven't you?" Kate flinched, the words stinging more than she expected. But there was no denial in her eyes. "No, John. I haven't been working with Marshall. I left because I had to. I had to get away from everything, I had to think. But what I realized is that I was wrong to leave. I thought I was protecting myself, but in doing so, I left you to deal with all of this alone." John's breath caught in his throat. The words she spoke were raw, vulnerable. It was clear that there was more to her disappearance than he had ever known. "Then why come back now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you trust me enough to come to me earlier? This isn't just a business deal, Kate. People's lives are on the line." Kate's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her voice filled with sincerity. Because I found out something, John. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Ryan Lawson, he's my brother. John's world seemed to tilt, as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. What? You're related to Lawson, he stammered, struggling to process the words. But how? Why didn't you tell me before? Kate closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of her secret pressing down on her. I didn't know what to say. I thought I could keep it hidden. But I couldn't anymore. When I left, I was running from him, from the power he had over me. I didn't want to be a part of his world. I didn't want you to be dragged into it, either. John shook his head, disbelief washing over him. This changes everything, Kate. You should have told me. If you had, I would have understood. We could have fought this together. She stepped forward, her voice pleading. I know, John. I know. And I regret it every day. But I can help you now. Lawson isn't just some business tycoon. He's dangerous. He's been manipulating everything, everyone. He's been using me, using my name, to get close to you. To destroy everything you've worked for. John stared at her, torn between the past and the present. It wasn't just the betrayal of Marshall that haunted him now. It was the betrayal of someone who had once been his partner, his equal, someone who had shared his dreams and his vision. And now, that very person was caught in the web of deceit they had been trying to untangle. I don't know if I can trust you, Kate, John said, his voice filled with frustration. How do I know this isn't just another game? Another lie? Kate's eyes filled with pain. Because I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking you to listen. I know you've been fighting this battle alone, but you don't have to. Together, we can stop him. We can expose him. But you have to let me help you. John stared at her for a long moment, his mind racing with the implications of what she was saying. If what she said was true, then Ryan Lawson had been pulling strings all along, not just with Marshall, but with everything that had ever threatened to tear them apart. Kate's involvement, her connection to Lawson, was the final piece of the puzzle he had been missing. I'm not doing this alone anymore, John said, his voice firm. We'll take him down. Together. Kate nodded, relief flooding her features. I'm with you, John. We can do this. But we need to move fast. Lawson is already making his next move. Just as the words left her mouth, John's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down, and his face went pale. The message was from Marcus. It was simple, and yet it felt like the world was about to come crashing down. They know. They're coming for you. Before John could respond, a distant sound echoed in the street behind them, a series of car engines, revving too loudly to be ignored. The message on John's phone was brief, but it hit him like a ton of bricks. They know. They're coming for you. His mind raced, adrenaline kicking in. It was no longer just a metaphorical battle, it was real, and the enemy was closing in. This wasn't just a fight for the future of his nonprofit or even for the truth about Ryan Lawson. This was a fight for his life. He turned to Kate, his heart pounding. We have to move, now. Kate didn't ask questions. She understood the gravity of the situation. Her eyes widened in alarm, and she immediately pulled her phone from her pocket, dialing a number. John couldn't hear the conversation, but from the urgency in her tone, he knew she was making arrangements. They were both in this together now, whether they liked it or not. Before John could even process what was happening, a sharp sound broke through the tension, the distinct roar of several engines approaching at high speed. The cars weren't far off, maybe a block or two. Panic began to set in. They didn't have time to debate strategy or plan next steps. The enemy was already here. Kate's face went pale. We don't have a choice. We need to run. They didn't need to say another word. Both turned and sprinted toward the alley at the back of the warehouse. John's heart thudded in his chest, the sound of their footsteps echoing against the cold concrete. Every part of him screamed to turn around, to look over his shoulder and see if they were being followed. But he kept his focus ahead. He didn't have the luxury of fear, not yet. They rounded the corner, and John caught a glimpse of the street ahead. The headlights of several cars gleamed in the distance. He could make out the silhouettes of men, figures that had been planted in the shadows for far too long. They had been waiting for this moment, for the perfect time to strike. Kate grabbed his arm, pulling him into a narrow side street. "We need to lose them. Now." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the fear that was beginning to rise in his throat. John didn't waste time. He knew the city like the back of his hand, and his mind was already racing with escape routes. He had to think fast. The stakes were higher than ever, and the clock was ticking. They darted down the street, past a few abandoned storefronts. The buildings loomed over them like silent sentinels, watching their every move. There were no friendly faces around, no allies to turn to for help. It was just him, Kate, and the looming threat of whatever was coming after them. John's phone buzzed again, but he didn't have the time to check it. He didn't want to waste a second. He could hear the sound of tires screeching in the distance, the unmistakable sound of vehicles trying to cut them off. "We're running out of time," Kate panted as they turned another corner. "John, what's the plan?" He glanced over at her, his mind working at 100 miles per hour. "We need to get to the safe house. There's a place on the edge of the city, a former contact I used to trust. We can lay low there for a while." Kate nodded. "All right, but we need to get there without being seen. If they're after us, we can't afford to be predictable." John didn't have to tell her twice. They picked up the pace, moving as fast as they could without drawing attention. He could feel the sweat on his brow, the cold night air biting into his skin. His legs burned, but there was no stopping. He knew what was at stake. His mind flashed to the people he was trying to protect, his team, the veterans who relied on his work. He couldn't let them down. But just as they approached an overpass that would take them closer to the safe house, something unexpected happened. A car skidded around the corner up ahead, blocking their path. The sound of its tires screeching against the asphalt echoed in the narrow street. John's heart stopped for a split second. Two men got out of the car, moving quickly and efficiently. They were dressed in black, their faces obscured by masks, but their intent was clear: they weren't here to talk. Kate instinctively pushed John behind her, her eyes scanning the men. "Stay behind me," she whispered, her voice tense. "We can't fight them, but we can get away." John's pulse quickened as he looked around. They were trapped. The narrow alley behind them offered no real cover, and the men in front were closing in. There was no escape this time. Before he could react, one of the men raised a gun, pointing it directly at them. John's heart skipped a beat, but before he could make a move, Kate's instincts took over. With a swift motion, she grabbed a nearby metal pipe lying discarded on the ground, swinging it hard and fast toward the man holding the weapon. The blow landed with a sickening crack, knocking the man's gun from his hand. He staggered back, disoriented, but before he could recover, Kate was already on the move, grabbing John's arm and pulling him forward. "Go," she shouted, her voice raw with urgency. They ran, and the world around them seemed to blur. Their footsteps echoed in the night, but the sound of the men chasing them only grew louder. John could hear the heavy panting behind them as they raced down the street, but they weren't going to let up. They couldn't afford to slow down. Every step they took felt like it might be their last. John's mind raced as he glanced around for any way to shake their pursuers. There was no clear escape route, no alley that would lead them to safety. They were being hunted. But just as they approached an intersection, something unexpected happened. Another car came screeching around the corner, this time from the opposite direction. It wasn't their pursuers. The car skidded to a stop right in front of them, and the door flung open. "Get in," a voice shouted from inside. John didn't hesitate. Without a second thought, he grabbed Kate's hand, pulling her toward the car. They didn't have time to question who was inside or why they had come. They just needed to get out of there. As they slammed the door shut, the car peeled off, accelerating into the night. John glanced over at the driver. The face that met his eyes was familiar, too familiar. It was Marcus. But what was he doing here? And why had he come to save them? As the car sped away, John felt a knot form in his stomach. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And the answers he was seeking might not be as simple as he had hoped. The car sped through the winding streets, its tires squealing as Marcus skillfully navigated the sharp turns. John and Kate sat in the back, breathless, trying to catch their bearings. The adrenaline was still coursing through their veins, but now they were on the move, with no clear destination other than away from danger. The sound of their pursuers had faded into the distance, but the sense of unease had only grown stronger. John's eyes darted between Kate and Marcus. The situation was spiraling out of control, and now, the question that loomed large in his mind was, why was Marcus here? Kate's face was still pale, her breathing slow but steady as she wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. John could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw clenched. She was just as confused as he was. And maybe a little scared. Finally, John broke the silence. "Marcus, what the hell is going on? Why are you here? How did you know we were in trouble?" Marcus's hands gripped the wheel, his eyes on the road. "I've been following the situation," he said, his voice calm but tinged with something else. "I had a feeling things were about to go south. You don't survive in this game without noticing the signs." He glanced in the rearview mirror, his jaw tightening. "I couldn't let them get to you. Not after everything you've been doing." John's confusion deepened. "What do you mean, everything I've been doing?" Marcus kept his eyes on the road, his lips pressed together in a tight line. "You've been making waves, John. Big ones. And not just in the non-profit world. You've been digging into things people don't want to have dug into. Lawson is involved, no doubt about that. But he's not the only one." John frowned. "What do you mean, he's not the only one?" Marcus's grip tightened on the wheel as he took another sharp turn. "There are others, John. People much higher up. People who will stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. Lawson's just the visible piece. The puppet in this whole thing." John leaned forward, trying to absorb the information. "You're saying there's more to this? Who else is involved? And why are you telling me this now?" Marcus sighed, his voice lowering. "Because you need to know the truth, John. I've been watching the whole operation for months, gathering intel from every angle. You thought you were just up against Lawson, but it's bigger than that. There's a network of powerful individuals pulling strings in the background. People who could make your life hell without even breaking a sweat." John's mind raced. The last few months had been a whirlwind of accusations, betrayals, and endless battles. It had all been about Lawson, about stopping him and his empire from destroying everything John had built. But now, Marcus was suggesting that the man John had been focused on wasn't even the root of the problem. Kate spoke up, her voice trembling. "So, who are these people, Marcus? Who's been pulling the strings?" Marcus met her gaze through the rearview mirror. "I can't give you names, not yet. Not until we have more concrete evidence. But I can tell you this, they've infiltrated every level of the system. From the highest political offices to the corporate boardrooms, they have their hands in everything. They control industries, finances, even the very laws that keep people in check." John's stomach turned. The implications of Marcus's words were far-reaching, more terrifying than he had imagined. The thought of a shadow network manipulating everything from the economy to justice was a nightmare, and John had unwittingly stepped into the heart of it. But why me? John asked, his voice strained. Why am I the one they're targeting? Why not just shut me down quietly? Marcus's expression darkened. You're not just a threat to their profits, John. You're a threat to their power. What you've been doing with your nonprofit, exposing corruption, helping people, it's not just charity. It's a movement. And that movement is gaining traction. You're making people believe in something bigger than the system they've built. And that's dangerous to them. John felt a shiver run down his spine. The more he heard, the clearer it became that everything he had been fighting for, everything he had believed in, was under direct attack by people who controlled everything from the shadows. It was bigger than he could have imagined. But there was one question that still burned in his mind. And what about you, Marcus? Why are you helping us? What do you want? Marcus didn't answer immediately. For a moment, there was only the sound of the tires on the road and the occasional hum of the engine. Then, finally, Marcus spoke. Because I've seen it. I've been on the inside long enough to know how things work. I used to be part of it, the system, the corruption, the manipulation. But I got out. I saw the light, and I couldn't turn back. I'm trying to stop them, John. They're dangerous, and I won't let them destroy what you're building. John studied Marcus's face. There was sincerity in his eyes, but also a level of desperation that made John question how far Marcus was willing to go to take down this network. The situation was murky, and trust was hard to come by now. But in a world where everything felt like a lie, Marcus was the only ally they had left. Kate spoke again, her voice softer now. So, what do we do now? How do we take them down? Marcus's lips curled into a grim smile. We go after them, one step at a time. We start with Lawson. But we don't stop there. We expose everyone involved. We hit them where it hurts, their money, their influence, their power. We take away what they value the most, and we make them pay for what they've done. John nodded slowly, his mind processing the plan. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was the only one they had left. There was no turning back now. The war wasn't just about taking down one man, it was about dismantling an entire system built on lies and corruption. And he was ready to fight. As the car continued to weave through the streets, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His phone buzzed again, but this time, the message wasn't from Marcus or anyone he knew. It was from an unknown number. You're playing a dangerous game, John. You have no idea who you're really up against. We're watching. Always. John's blood ran cold. Who was this? And what did they know? The pieces were starting to fit together, but this game was far from over. The real enemy had yet to reveal itself. The words on John's phone screen seemed to burn into his mind. You're playing a dangerous game, John. You have no idea who you're really up against. We're watching. Always. For a moment, everything in the car seemed to stop. The air felt thick with tension, and John's hand tightened around the phone in his palm. He glanced at Kate, whose eyes were wide with concern, then at Marcus, who was still focused on the road. No one spoke, but the weight of the message hung heavy between them. Kate leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. What does that mean, John? Who's watching us? John's mind raced. His fingers hovered over the phone as he tried to process what was happening. He had no idea who sent the message, but the coldness of the words sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't just a threat, it felt like a warning, like they were already one step ahead of him. I don't know, John said, his voice tight. But it's not good. Marcus's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles turning white. This changes things, he muttered under his breath, his voice dark and filled with something John couldn't quite place. They're not just watching you, John. They're watching everything. What do you mean? John asked, leaning forward. His eyes were locked on Marcus now, searching for answers. Marcus finally turned his head, his eyes meeting John's with a look of grim determination. There's no way around it now. They've got eyes everywhere. Every move you make, every phone call, every step you take, it's all being tracked. Whoever this is, they're part of the same network. And they're not going to stop until they have you. John felt his pulse quicken. He wasn't sure if it was the thought of being constantly watched or the realization that the network they were up against had more reach than he could have imagined. Either way, the odds were stacking against them. We need to get to the safe house, Marcus continued. It's the only place where we'll be out of their radar for a while. We can lay low, figure out our next move. John nodded, trying to steady his breathing. Okay. But we need to figure out who's behind this. If they're watching us, they're already anticipating our every move. Marcus gave a sharp nod. Exactly. We need to start playing their game, but on our terms. This is bigger than just Lawson or anyone else we've been going after. There's something far more dangerous at the center of all this. Kate looked between John and Marcus, her expression darkening. We can't just keep running. We have to turn the tables somehow. John met her gaze, his mind already calculating their next move. I know. But we need more information. Whoever this is, they've been in control for too long. It's time for them to lose their grip. The car turned a corner, and the familiar silhouette of an old industrial complex loomed ahead. The safe house was close, but even though they were nearly there, the sense of urgency had only intensified. The walls around them felt like they were closing in. They needed to be ready for whatever came next. Marcus pulled the car into a hidden parking spot behind the building, his movements quick and precise. Stay alert, he said as he killed the engine. This place is secure, but we can't stay here long. They'll find us if we don't move fast. John and Kate were already out of the car before Marcus finished speaking. The cold night air hit them, and John instinctively reached for his jacket. They moved swiftly toward the entrance of the building, where Marcus punched in a code on a keypad by the door. The sound of the door unlocking echoed in the quiet night. Inside, the space was eerily quiet. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the streets, and John couldn't help but feel a sense of temporary relief as they stepped inside. The safe house wasn't much, an old warehouse converted into a hideout, but it was secure. For now. As they settled inside, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. Kate sat at the table, pulling out her laptop to start going through the information they had on Lawson and the mysterious network behind him. Marcus paced by the window, his eyes scanning the streets for any sign of danger. John stood near the door, his thoughts racing. He needed to figure out who was behind this, the true mastermind pulling the strings. Lawson was just the tip of the iceberg. But if they were watching his every move, how could they ever get ahead of them? His phone buzzed again. It was another message, but this time it wasn't a cryptic threat. The sender was someone he recognized. I know what you're doing, John. You're digging into something you don't understand. Stop now, and I'll help you. Keep going, and you won't like what happens next. John's breath caught in his throat. The message was from someone who worked with him in the past, a former ally in the fight against corruption. But now, they were warning him to stop, as if they knew something he didn't. What's wrong? Kate asked, noticing the change in his expression. John showed her the message, and she leaned in, frowning. Who sent this? I don't know, he admitted. But they're clearly warning me off. Do you trust them? She asked, her voice low. John shook his head. I don't know who to trust anymore. Marcus came over and glanced at the phone. This isn't good, he muttered. Whoever this is, they've got a vested interest in you stopping. They're probably one of the people behind this whole mess. Then we have to keep going, John said, determination setting in. We can't back down now. But as John spoke, he felt the weight of the situation crash down on him. If they were being watched by someone with so much power, how could they fight back? How could they possibly expose the full extent of the corruption without falling into a trap? Kate's voice broke through his thoughts. We can't fight them head-on yet. We need to be smart about this. We need to gather everything, every piece of intel we can find. And we need to be ready when the time comes. Marcus nodded. Agreed. But we're not just fighting one enemy anymore. We're taking down a whole system. And that's going to take more than just a few good people. It's going to take everyone willing to join us. And right now, that number's pretty small. John knew Marcus was right. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. But something inside him refused to quit. He had seen too much injustice, too much pain caused by this network. He couldn't stop now, not when they were so close. The safe house was quiet, but the storm outside was just beginning. They couldn't stay hidden forever. They had to find a way to turn the tables on their enemies, to expose the truth, and to survive long enough to see justice done. Just as John turned to speak, there was a sudden knock at the door. It was light, almost casual, but the sound felt like a death sentence. John's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? Had they found them already? The door creaked open slightly, revealing a shadowy figure standing outside. John, the figure said softly. It's time you knew the full truth. John's stomach dropped. Who was this person? And what did they know about the web of corruption closing in on them? The shadowy figure stood in the doorway, cloaked in darkness, its face hidden. The quiet night around them seemed to hold its breath, the tension palpable. The knock had come like a warning, but now, as the figure slowly stepped into the light, it felt like the calm before a storm. John's heart pounded in his chest. Who was this person? And why did it feel like everything he'd worked for was about to unravel? Kate stood first, her eyes narrowed as she took in the mysterious figure. Marcus followed suit, moving cautiously to John's side. They were on edge, every muscle in their bodies ready for a fight, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Who are you? John's voice was steady, but the weight of the question made it sound more like a demand than an inquiry. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, they stepped forward, slowly revealing their face. John's eyes widened in shock as recognition hit him like a freight train. It was someone he had not seen in years, someone he thought was long gone from his life. Sarah. John's voice cracked as he whispered her name, almost in disbelief. Sarah stood there, her eyes darkened with the weight of everything she had seen and done. Her once bright expression was now replaced by something colder, harder. She was no longer the woman he remembered, the ally he trusted. Now, she was someone entirely different. I knew you wouldn't believe me at first, Sarah said, her voice low but steady. But you need to listen. The truth is worse than you think. John's mind was reeling. How could it be Sarah? The woman he had once trusted to help him expose corruption, the one who had helped him at every turn, had seemingly disappeared without a trace after their last mission. He had assumed she had moved on, perhaps found a safer life after everything they'd gone through. But now, seeing her standing before him, it all felt like a trap. What's going on, Sarah? Why are you here? Why didn't you contact me sooner? John's voice was filled with frustration, but also fear. He could sense the weight of the situation, the looming danger that was closing in around them. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering to Kate and Marcus. She then looked back at John, her gaze unwavering. I had no choice, she said quietly. I'm not here to betray you, John. I'm here to save you. The words hung in the air, thick with a sense of urgency. But even as she spoke, John couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. He had no way of knowing if he could trust her. This was the same woman who had disappeared without a trace, the same woman who had once been at the center of everything they were fighting against. Save us from what? Kate asked, her voice sharp and defensive. We've been running from people who want to destroy everything we've built. How do we know you're not working for them? Sarah's face softened, but her eyes remained cold and determined. Because I was one of them. I know how they think. I know how they operate. And I've been on the inside, feeding information for years. But now, she trailed off, her expression hardening. Now it's too dangerous. They know I'm out. They've been watching me just like they've been watching you. John took a step forward, his mind racing. You were working for them all this time? Sarah nodded slowly. At first, yes. I was part of the network, feeding them information, keeping everything in line. But the deeper I got, the more I saw what they were really doing. The corruption, the control, the manipulation of everything we stand for. I couldn't keep going. So I cut ties. But it's not that simple. They don't just let you walk away. They'll kill you before you get the chance to leave. Marcus's voice was cold and skeptical. So, you think you can just walk back in after years of betrayal and tell us you're on our side? Sarah's gaze flickered to Marcus. I don't expect you to trust me, Marcus. But I'm not here for revenge or redemption. I'm here to finish what we started. John felt his pulse race as the weight of her words hit him. Could he trust her? Could they afford not to? The network they were up against was bigger, more powerful, and more dangerous than anything they had anticipated. They needed all the help they could get. Why come now? After all this time? John asked, his voice full of questions. Why reveal yourself now? Sarah's expression turned grim. Because they're getting close, John. Closer than you think. They've been tracking you, watching every move you've made since you started this crusade. They know everything about you, about us, and they're about to make their move. John's mind spun with the implications. The message from the unknown sender, the threat to his life, and now Sarah's sudden appearance, it was all starting to fall into place. But even as the pieces came together, one question remained at the forefront of his mind: how far did the web of corruption go? They've been monitoring us from the start, Sarah continued. And they won't stop until they've taken everything you've built, everything you've fought for. But I know where the key is, John. I know the one person who can take them down. Who? Kate asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah's eyes locked with John's. I can't tell you yet. Not until you're ready. But we need to act fast. We don't have much time. The weight of Sarah's words hung in the air like a threat, heavy and suffocating. John felt the walls closing in around them, but he also knew this was their chance. This was the moment when everything could change. If Sarah was telling the truth, they had an opportunity to strike at the heart of the network that had been pulling the strings for far too long. John looked at Kate, then at Marcus. The decision was theirs to make. But it wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about taking back control. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. This wasn't just a fight for his life. It was a fight for the future of everything he believed in. Let's do it, John said, his voice firm. Let's take them down. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?